everyone, welcome to today's lecture. The topic of today's lecture is environment and sustainable development. So before we get into the topic in greater detail, let me give you the outline of today's presentation. So first we are going to talk about what is development. That would be followed by a discussion on how environment is linked with the idea of economic development. Thirdly, we are going to address the following question. What is the impact of economic development on environment? And lastly, we are going to address the question of sustainable development. What is sustainable development and what are the ways we can achieve the sustainable development? So after we are done with this lecture, what are the lecture outcomes? So you are going to expect the following lecture outcomes. So you will have an idea of what is economic development. You will also have an idea how environment plays a very crucial role in economic development. And lastly, you will have an idea about sustainable development and various ways one can achieve sustainable development. So as I have told you that we are going to focus on the first question of what is economic development, right? So before getting into the question, let us try to conceptualize the economy as a whole. As you can see from the graph that economy is a larger part or is a part of the society, right? And society is also part of biosphere and physical environment. So what does it mean? It means economy is embedded in society and we are part of the society, right? Like we human being are part of the society and we're constantly interacting with the environment. In what sense? Like we depend upon environment, we take so much resources for environment. For instance, we take air, we take water, right? Other than that, we also take various types of natural resources. For instance, we take raw material, we take woods, coal, gas, etc., right? So it is giving us an understanding that economy and environment, it links together, right? It is one is feeding each other, right? So moving on. So the central stage at this economy, the central stage is the production. So you think of any kind of example of any kind of production. So what are the various factors of production are required? We know it's land, labor, capital. Again, land, it's coming from the environment, right? Then also water. Then also various kind of energy we use generally in any kind of a production process. So if you're talking about economic development, so something has to be related with this kind of production. We'll come into it. So what is economic development? So to put it very loosely, maybe a better standard of living, maybe better job opportunities, or also maybe a good lifestyle, right? To put it very loosely. So if you follow the development economics, if you follow the tradition of development economics, so development economics has given two ideas or two ways of conceptualizing economic development. First one is traditional way, or we can call it as income approach, where it would be only measured by the income of a nation or per capita GDP or GDP of a nation. This is the orthodox way of understanding in development. But there are other approach also to understand development. For instance, this type of approach or the newer development approaches actually came into existence in and around 1970s. So what are those? So the economists who came up with this kind of understanding, they are saying, okay, income is very important, but income is necessary, but not sufficient. So to understand the development, we also have to understand poverty. We have to reduce poverty. We have to reduce inequality. We also have to reduce unemployment, okay? So the traditional approach of development talks about, mainly their prescription is how to increase the income, okay? And one policy prescription is industrialization. In this lecture, we are mainly trying to focus on this traditional approach of development, okay? So how do we measure standard of living? So I'm sure all of you have fair amount of idea of what is GDP, but still I have put a definition. So what is GDP? So GDP basically measures the market value of the output of final goods and services in the economy in a given year. And what is per capita GDP? So GDP by population. So if a country is witnessing rising per capita GDP, that means GDP is rising at a higher rate than the population growth, right? Then the country can be conceptualize as that it witnessing some amount of development. Okay. Now focus on this graph. What is there? So now on the y-axis, we have measured GDP per capita, and on the y-axis is the year. So it shows that how various countries have done over the years in terms of GDP per capita. So I have put here Britain, Japan, Italy, China, and India. You can see the blue line, it's the Britain's GDP per capita, is the highest. So the level of GDP per capita is highest in Britain. It's understandable, right? Britain is already a developed nation. Look at India. India is the black color graph or black color curve. India's GDP is also rising. Per capita GDP is also rising. But the level, if you compare with Britain, Japan, and China, compared to them, India's per capita GDP level is lower. So it shows us that various countries actually have done well in terms of per capita GDP. That means some amount of development has happened in all the nations, across the nations, okay? Maybe the level might differ or might vary, okay? So at this juncture, I would ask you to take a pause and think. We have been talking about development, but where environment is figuring here? First, we have talked about that we are using environment as resources. But while conceptualizing development, we have not talked about it. So now it's time to pause, take a pause and think how economic development is related to environment. Okay, so what did we ask? We asked the following questions. How this economic development is related to environment, right? So to answer this question, just let us focus on the following graph. What this graph is showing? It is showing growth in population, food production, economic production, and energy use. So we are taking, at this point, we are taking the traditional approach of development. That is, we are just focusing on GDP and per capita GDP growth. Look at the focus on this graph. What it's showing? Population has increased over the time, right? So this is at world level, at global level. So the point is from between 1960 and 2020. So definitely population has increased. Along with that, food production has also increased. If population is increasing, you can understand that we need to produce food for the population, right? Rising population. That has also increased. Along with that, gross world product, that has also increased, but increased at a higher rate than the population. So that was the primary condition of the development, right? That your per capita GDP should rise at a faster rate than your population growth. Correct? So along with that, another point I would like you to focus on is the energy, the dotted black line, right? Dotted black line, that has also increased. So what all are increasing? Population has increased, first of all. Second of all, gross world product has increased. Along with that, energy use has also increased. So over the time, kind of development or kind of rising GDP per capita growth had taken place in all over the world. Now, this particular graph focuses on economic growth between 1961 and 2020, but by country, by income category. That means we have low, middle, and high income countries, right? The blue line, the most blue line, what does it show? It shows that is the high income country. They have witnessed rising GDP per capita between this period. But the low income country, look at the focus on the extreme below blue line. What does it show? It has increased, but at a stagnant rate, okay? It is only the high income country which had witnessed higher per capita GDP growth, okay? Now, focus here. What are we going to show here? Here is, on the left hand panel, we have hockey stick of, it looks like a hockey stick, right? Hockey stick of GDP per capita. Why I'm talking it as a hockey stick? Just focus on the graph. You can see that it just looks like a hockey stick. And it is the similar graph which we have discussed earlier, where we are showing the per capita GDP of Britain, Japan, Italy, China, and India, right? So everything, all the GDP, per capita GDP had increased, and although the only difference is that the levels are different. Definitely the GDP per capita is higher in Britain compared to India. But what is the point why I would like to emphasize here? I would like to emphasize here on the following point, that each and every country had witnessed at some point that the rising part of hockey stick, right? Maybe the timing may not be the same. For instance, for Britain, if you focus on the graph, it came around between 1600 to 1800. But for Indian economy, it came around after 1800, right? So it may not be the same. On the right side of this panel, we have global fossil fuel consumption. So what does it show? It shows again the similar type of hockey stick we can observe for this global fossil fuel consumption, this gas, oil and coal. It is showing that, okay, along with this per capita GDP of various countries or throughout the world, the global fossil fuel consumption has also increased. So it seems there is a direct connection between per capita GDP growth or per capita level of GDP growth with this global fossil fuel consumption that has also increased. The point is, if we are using so much from environment, are we really polluting the environment? Is there any kind of environmental degradation taking place? Yes, there are. And it can also be represented through a graph. We call it environmental Kuznets curve. Let us focus on what is environmental Kuznets curve. So a graph reflecting the concept that pollution and other environmental degradation first rises and then falls with increasing in per capita income, right? Focus on this particular environmental Kuznets curve. It looks like an inverted U curve, okay? So at first, when per capita income, at the level of per capita income is low of a country, that time when the production is taking place, so that time environmental pollution is also increasing. But as the per capita income is rising, what is happening? The level of pollution or environmental degradation is actually going down. Why it is happening? Because if the country is getting rich and richer day by day, what they can do? They can invest in curbing pollution technologies, okay? So that is why environmental degradation at some point of time generally goes down. That is given by this environmental Kuznets curve. But there are case studies. There are case studies which actually shows it may not exactly look like that inverted U curve, but it looks like the following. This is a particular environmental Kuznets curve for a particulate called PM10. PM10 is quite, it's kind of something which is, we inhale and it's also not good for health. There is a limit. And if it is present more than that, then it's not good for health. So look at the graph. It does not exactly look like inverted U, but it shows that as the per capita income of a country has increased, but this PM10 has also declined over the time. But it is not true for all the other thing. Here, I'm presenting the data or the relationship between carbon dioxide emission and GDP per capita. What it shows, as GDP per capita increases over time, so does this carbon dioxide emission. And all of us are aware about the fact that carbon dioxide emission or carbon dioxide is not good for human being and not good for the environment as well. Now the question is, fine, economic development has taken place and we are observing GDP per capita growth has increased over the world and in various countries as well. But now the question is, what is this impact of this economic development on environment, as well as what is the impact of this economic development on human being? So what is the impact of economic development on environment? That is the question we are discussing right now. So focus on this particular graph. It shows the total greenhouse gas emissions, right? The topmost curve, that is the blue one, that is world. This is the world total greenhouse gas emission. What does it show? What is the trend? It is rising. As well as we have also incorporated China, United States and India. As you can see, even if United States in terms of per capita GDP. It's a developed country, but their level of greenhouse gas emission is below than China, right? The point is, United States is already developed country, so they might have invested in any kind of environmental resources. So to mitigate the environmental degradation, they have a lot of investment. They have done a lot of investment. But same is not true for India or China. They are already, at a developing stage, right? So the point is, the main point here I'm trying to emphasize is the total greenhouse gas emission had increased over the time. Why it is important? It is very important. Now, this is a graph of carbon dioxide. So it has atmospheric carbon dioxide, and it also have global carbon emissions from fossil fuel burning. As you can see, around 1900 onwards, it has risen at a very fastest rate, this global carbon emissions from fossil fuel burning. So what is the impact? As a result, the impact is quite hard on us. What is the impact? The basic impact is, because of this higher level of greenhouse gas emissions and because of this carbon dioxide, higher emissions of carbon dioxide, what is happening? That global temperature is rising. Focus on the left-hand panel of this particular graph, where we can see from 2018-19 onwards, the curve is rising, and it's actually all over the news. We can, if you're actually reading the newspaper, you'll get to know that this rising share of people are exposed to dangerously high temperatures. So in the various parts of world where temperature used to be, even during the summer, for instance, in London, even during the summer, the temperature is going as high as like above 30 degree, 35 degrees. So that is the kind of change we are observing. So this has definitely some link with the way we have generated, or we have done our production, the way we have conceptualized the idea of development. So it is not sustainable in a way, right? It is giving us problem. So it's just not the rising temperature. There are instances of flood, there are instances of drought all over the world. The point being here, I'm going to ask the following questions. So is there any alternative way to conceptualize development? So the way we have conceptualized development, or the way we are thinking that we are doing things or doing development, is that the right way? Can we have something else in place of this way of developing? Do we have to think about something else? Is there any way we can think sustainability? So I would ask you to think about it, and we'll get back. So the question we are asking here, is there any other alternative way we can conceptualize our development strategy? Yes, the good news is there is another way of conceptualizing the development strategy, that is called sustainable development. So in this context, I'm going to introduce the concept of sustainable development, but before that, let me just give you the brief historically how the concept has evolved over the time, okay? So it actually started long back. So long ago, actually, academicians and development policy makers, they were trying to talk about the sustainable development. So around 1972, in UN Conference on Human Environment, they talked about world conservation strategy. So they came up with some world conservation strategy where the main aim was achieving sustainable development, but the focus was on conservation of living resources. The sustainable development, this term actually came into prominence in the 1980s. So, in 1987, World Commission on Environment and Development published a report named Our Common Future. This is also known as Bertland Report. Okay? So, it is in this report we're actually getting the definition of sustainable development and the guided principle of sustainable development. Now, let me define what is sustainable development. So, from that report, we get the following definition. So sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So first time we are talking about our future generations. Just try to remember how do we conceptualize development till this point. We were talking about income, we are talking about poverty, we are talking about inequality, but we have not talked about our future generations. So sustainable development actually helping us to think through what will happen to our future generations if we are actually using up all our natural resources, or we are exploiting our natural resources in this period of time only. Okay, so what are the objectives of sustainable development? They are not denying the growth. Growth is very much important, but we have to focus on quality of growth. Along with that, all the other concerns like unemployment, poverty reduction will also be there. But it is the first time you're talking about or we are taking into account environment very seriously. We are trying to reorient our technology and we are trying to managing all kind of risk, okay? And we are talking in terms of making development much more participatory, all right? So these are the couple of goals of or objectives of sustainable development. Now the question is there any framework which actually accommodate this sustainable development? Because all of you are aware about the GDP or how do we calculate GDP or what are the composition of GDP. But there was no component called environment. We need some kind of framework where we are actually incorporating environment. Yes, we have that framework now. So this following equation where we are defining, instead of defining in terms of national income, we are defining in terms of sustainable national income, that is NNI, and we know that capital is always very important, right, for any kind of production. So that is manufactured capital. That is there, and here the first time we are also taking into account depreciation of natural capital. So what are this natural capital? All the natural resources we generally use. So the first equation is actually taking into account natural capital or depreciation of natural capital. It gives us GNI minus DM minus DN. More better measure would be the second equation, where DN stands as it is, the way I have already explained, but here we are incorporating R. What is R? R is expenditure required to restore environmental capital. That is forest fisheries. So if you are using up your forest, are you trying to restore it? So if you are going for the restoration, you have to put money, right? You have to invest on that. So that is taken into account in NNI, the second equation. And there is another term called A. What is A? A is expenditure required to avoid destruction of environmental capital. So two types of expenditure we can actually take into account, and we can have a sustainable national income instead of just having a national income. Now the question is, what are the global leaders or what are the global players are doing? So we understood what is development, but what are the policy measures has been taken at the global level? At the different country level, there are definitely there are a lot of development policies, but at the global level, we came up, or the global leaders came up with Millennium Development Goals. It was in and around 2000, but their main focus was on eradication of poverty. Look, there is only one component or only one goal, that is 7, where they have talked about ensure environmental sustainability, okay? But their main emphasis was on eradicating extreme absolute poverty. But moving on, in 2017, the UN actually are coming up with what is called Sustainable Development Goals. It is very much different from Millennium Development Goals. There are 17 sustainable development goals, which I'm going to discuss, but the point is all these goals are very integrated. So if you're taking action in one goal, then there will be another outcome, and those outcomes would be very integrated. Okay, so this is also known as global goals, and all the countries are participating, or they're trying to achieve these sustainable development goals, and they're committed towards the sustainable development goals. So what are the goals? Let's just focus on that. So first, no poverty. Second, zero hunger, which is very important. Third one, good health and well-being. Quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation. So here, first, clean water is coming from environment. It's being recognized here. Affordable clean energy. Again, again one component of environment. Decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, which were also part of Millennium Development Goals, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action. So first, climate action is coming here. Life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions, partnership for the goals. So these are 17 distinct goals where you can observe there are a lot of goals which are actually concerning with the environment directly. So we had actually moved from this income approach to the sustainable development goals, right? Now the point is, what is the present situation? Which country have achieved the sustainable development goal? So this is a dashboard where I'm just going to explain one or two. So let us take this low income countries. So let us take no poverty. So if it's red, so red says major challenge remains, okay? So for low income countries, to achieve this no poverty goal, major challenges remain. But there is arrow this arrow is showing that it is stagnating, okay? Similarly, let us focus on some climate, let's say focus on climate action, this 13, goal number 13. So for high income countries, as you can see, for high income countries also, achieving this goal, climate action, major challenges remain. But for low income countries, if you follow this particular row, SDG achievement is on track. So low income countries are actually have taken action to achieve this climate action. So this is itself very self-explanatory. You can take a look by yourself and try to see which countries or which regions have actually on track or which regions are going behind. But the point is, we have to reach to achieve all these sustainable development goals if we have to achieve sustainability. So what are the take-home points from this particular lecture? So we started with the question of development. So we have seen at the traditional way of the development was to understand how GDP and per capita GDP is growing, okay, whether there is industrialization or not. But gradually that definition got broadened enough. What did happen? So we are taking into account now poverty, inequality, unemployment, okay? But as we progress, we finally realized we are ignoring one very important indicators or one very important resources which we have been using, that is environmental resources. So we finally have recognized environmental resources we have incorporated into our framework. And we have come up with sustainable development, and we are saying that, okay, fine, we should not be spending all our environmental resources only in our lifetime. We should also think of our future generation. And from there, we have come up, or the global leaders, or they have come up with sustainable development goals, and we are trying to reach so that our future generation can live in a great prosperity. Thank you.